Hey guys, it's Faye from Solar Flow, and I am back with an all-new video. Today's topic is a deep dive behind the veil energy read into the curious case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Now, this has been a much requested topic due to the three-dimensional facts that surround this case, which is as such. Gypsy Rose is a young woman that had been presented as if she was disabled when she was in fact fully bodied and fully abled. In addition to that, she had endured numerous medical treatments that were not in fact medically necessary. All of this was done at the behest of her mother, Claudine Blanchard. And subsequently, Claudine was unalived by Gypsy Rose, or Gypsy Rose, I can't say had done it herself, but she had certainly been involved in the unaliving of Claudine. So we are going to be exploring not just the three-dimensional facts on this case. We're also going to be looking into the behind the veil energy read in exploring what was the driving force and motivation in Claudine seeking medically unnecessary treatment to be administered to her daughter, as well as why Gypsy Rose had gone along with it, as well as what Gypsy Rose's energy had wanted to share with me about where she is and what she is doing today. All this and so much more. So buckle up, buttercups, because this in fact be a wild one. And if you are a seasoned Solar Flow viewer, you know that the 3D facts of a case are not my specialty, because we have Wikipedia and we have Google for that. And I don't typically love looking at any of the 3D facts on anything, because to me that's really just reinforcing the matrix, and it's a reinforcement of what is being presented to us, but it's not actually a reveal of what is. So I don't typically love to look into or even really discuss the 3D facts of a case, but I will share with you that when I had looked into the 3D facts of this case just last night, I was like, okay, whoa. Because when you guys had been, requesting this topic to me, I thought this was just like a case of like, a mom that was like a nuisance, and she's just like schlepping her kid to the doctor's office, and she's like, just look at my kid and tell me my kid's okay. Not so, not so. Holy fucking hell, what was actually done here is like next level. So I'm going to start with the 3D facts, because maybe you are like me and you are somebody that doesn't read newspapers or watch the news, or maybe even read People magazine, or maybe you're tuning in from another country and this was never really in your orbit. So let's start with it and see what is the wild events that have transpired to Gypsy Rose and how she chose to respond to it on a strictly 3D level. So here we go. Now, I'm just gonna remind you guys, here's the thing, if you're new, I'm not reminding you, I'm just sharing with you, that first and foremost, I will never ever read any of the 3D facts about a case prior to channeling the information. And the reason for that is that I never want my mind to be influenced by the 3D facts of a case. So I had looked into the energy on Gypsy Rose about 10 days ago, but only last night had I looked at Claudine's Wikipedia page and Gypsy Rose's Wikipedia page. So this is not a verbatim explanation of what had transpired. I just basically picked out things that I thought were of note for one particular reason or another, or I thought did a really good job in building out the 3D explanation of what had actually transpired. So some things are just strict 3D sharing, and some of it, if I thought it was notable, I'll explain why I thought it was notable. And as always, if it's anything is 2% personal opinion, I will share with you that it is 2% personal opinion. But for any of the Agent Smiths out there that want to argue in favor of the Matrix, I remind you, this is not the full breadth and scope of what Wikipedia had reported. If you want that, you're welcome to go to Wikipedia. If you want the goods, that's going on behind the veil, that's what I'm here for. All right, so here we go. Some 3D facts that were taken off of Wikipedia. Gypsy Rose Blanchard is a 32-year-old woman who was convicted of the second-degree unaliving of her mother, Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard. Gypsy Rose was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but was paroled after 8 years and was released in December of 2023. She gained widespread attention after the TV network Hulu had produced a limited series called The Act in 2019. Since then, Gypsy Rose has been featured in numerous interviews as well as variety TV shows. Now, this is something that I thought was particularly notable, which was at the time of Gypsy Rose's birth, her mother was 24 years old and her father was just 18. Now, the reason that I thought that this was something of note was because this is, before we even get into the, the behind the veil energy read here, to me, this is a reflection of one of three possibilities, which is A, it's either a reflection of the maturity level of Claudine at the time that she had Gypsy, because she's 24 and she is having a relationship with an 18-year-old. Or B, it's some sort of an indication of the kind of boys that were interested in her. Or C, it's an indication of what was available to her at that time in her life and where she lived. Now, all of this is going to make a lot more sense when we get into the energy reading on her, but I want you just to keep this in mind because, again, this seemed to be of import to me. Now, starting in infancy, Gypsy Rose's mother had started to complain about numerous health concerns. Now, this is in no particular order, and this is probably not all the 3D facts of what had been done to Gypsy Rose. However, what I had seen was, first and foremost, she had undergone Botox in or around her mouth, even though she had not needed it, because her mother would put like a numbing agent in her mouth that would cause her to excessively drool. So Botox was done to try to prevent the drooling. But then because of this so-called excessive drooling, it was causing teeth decay. So the front of, I don't know how many teeth, but the front portion of Gypsy Rose's teeth were extracted, and then a bridge of teeth was then put in. In addition to that, Gypsy Rose had some sort of a procedure done to her ears, which something was put into her ears because of the damage that the numerous so-called ear infections that she had had. In addition to that, Claudine had shaved Gypsy Rose's hair to mimic the hairless appearance of cancer patients, even though Gypsy Rose did not have cancer. In addition to that, when they would leave the house, Claudine would put Gypsy Rose into a wheelchair, even though she did not need it. And she would also take an oxygen tank, even though Gypsy Rose didn't need the oxygen either. Now, maybe you're listening to all of these facts and you were like, well, hold on. Did no doctor notice that these were not medically needed treatments? To which I'm going to say that it was noticed. However, in the event that a doctor would challenge the assessment that Claudine would report to the doctors, like she had muscular dystrophy, and then a doctor would run tests and biopsies and MRIs, and they would notice, well, actually, no, there's no reason that this little girl isn't walking. Well, then Claudine would just take her to a different doctor. So she did not like her sense of authority challenged. Now, in addition to that, Claudine had, I believe she had destroyed Gypsy Rose's birth certificate, and then she had falsified it to make it appear as if Gypsy Rose was a number of years younger than she in fact was. And Gypsy had experienced a great number of years of her life in which she in fact did not know how old she was. Now, she's a small girl. She's only about 5 feet tall, which would support this claim of her being younger than she in fact might have been. Now, she also did not have contact with her father. They had phone contact, but maybe they didn't have like face-to-face contact. And so he really wasn't that involved in her life for any meaningful extent for a great number of years. And one time the police actually had been called to the home, and Claudine had said that Gypsy Rose was mentally compromised, and the reason that she was always giving like different names and falsified information to the doctors, because this had gone noticed, was she had said that she was escaping the father, and the police had never even bothered to follow up with the father, and didn't know that actually, in fact, he had been in touch and he knew what was going on. He also knew what was going on because at one time Claudine had spoken to him when he had called to wish Gypsy Rose a happy birthday, and she had said to the father, "Don't tell Gypsy Rose how old she is because she doesn't know how old she is." And he went along with that. So there is obviously some clear level of dysfunction on both of the parents' part, irrespective of their involvement in Gypsy Rose's life. Now, here's also the thing, before I get to some more 3D facts. Claudine had moved Gypsy Rose from, I believe, Louisiana up to Missouri because Habitat for Humanity had built them a new home that also included a wheelchair ramp as well as a hot tub. They had also received free trips to Disneyland, as well as free concert tickets and backstage passes to the Miranda Lambert concert. So they've received, on a strictly three-dimensional level, some benefits due to the so-called medical concerns that Gypsy Rose was experiencing. Now, in 2012, Gypsy Rose had met a young man by the name of Nicholas Goad-John on a Christian single website. And although they did not meet until 2015, they had maintained contact for a number of years. In 2015, Gypsy Rose had paid for Nicholas Goad-John to travel to Missouri to meet her. He had come from Wisconsin. And at the time that they had first met, they arranged to meet in a movie theater and had gone into the bathroom and had had sex. Now, the reason that this is notable is, even if we, at this early juncture, we don't know why it's notable, it's still notable because, okay, they had just met in a bathroom, really? Says something, even if we're not sure what it says yet. Now, it was also at this time when they had first met that they had begun planning the unaliving of Claudine, Gypsy Rose's mother. It was not for a number of months later, in June of 2015, when the unaliving had in fact occurred. And what had transpired was that after Claudine had gone to sleep, Nicholas had showed up at their home, and Gypsy Rose had given him duct tape, a pair of gloves, and a knife, specifically with the intention of him using these things to unalive Claudine. Thereafter Gypsy Rose giving these items to him, she had gone and hidden in the bathroom while he had stabbed her mother 17 times. Shortly thereafter, Gypsy Rose's mother had been unalived. They had gone to her bedroom, and her and Nicholas Goad-John had had sex. Now again, even if we don't know what this indicates quite yet, her mother was just unalived, and they went and they had sex in her bedroom. Following thereafter, they had stolen $4,400 in cash, had stayed in a series of motels until they took a bus to Wisconsin to where Nick had lived. Now, how did all this come to be known was that after Claudine's friends had seen a concerning post on Facebook, they had contacted the authorities. And after the police had obtained a search warrant, they had entered the home and they had found the deceased body of Claudine. When they started to interview the neighbors, one of them had shared with the police that Gypsy Rose had confided in her that she had a boyfriend. And they had traced the IP address of the concerning Facebook post that had been posted. Guess where it was traced to? Nicholas, what was his last name? Nicholas Gojohn's home in Wisconsin. The police then went to Wisconsin, in which they had placed Nicholas and Gypsy Rose under arrest. Now, Gypsy Rose had subsequently pled guilty to, as I had stated, had been sentenced to 10 years in prison, to which she had served 8. Nicholas Gojohn, however, had been found guilty and had received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Now, in case you're wondering a little bit more about Nicholas Gojohn, as in why did he do this, on a strictly three-dimensional level, maybe what I'm about to share is going to provide some context. Certainly not the full breadth and scope, though. That we're going to get to in the energy read. However, Nick had a prior criminal record for indecent exposure, as well as a history of mental illness, and had also been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. Now, Gypsy Rose, after being released, had moved in with her husband because she had gotten married to a man by the name of Ryan Scott Anderson. She had moved in with him. They had done a number of TV interviews together, and then lo and behold, just 2 years later, she has already filed for divorce and is seeking a restraining order against him. Let us see what is going on behind the veil with all of these interesting characters and see what their energy had wanted to share. So now we get into the goods that the guides had brought, the reason that you guys are here, and the reason that I am here. Because 3D facts, fat. Energy, juicy. Here we go, the juicy goods. So as soon as I had connected to Gypsy Rose's energy, she had shared with me that she is loving all of the new attention that she has been receiving. She in fact feels as if she is the phoenix who has risen from the ashes of her burned to the ground previous life. And she feels she has emerged victorious and glorious. But here's the thing with Gypsy Rose. She has shut down such fundamental parts of herself through her childhood and all she has endured. She does not know what she does not know. And unfortunately for her, there's a lot that she does not know, either about herself, her life, or life in general. Because when I had connected to Gypsy Rose's energy, not only was she so excited to talk to me and to share with me, she had given me unfettered access to everything that she had endured, everything that was around her. And that is how I came to understand there's a lot that she doesn't know, and she doesn't know that she doesn't know it. And what I had seen about Gypsy Rose's energy is that to her, life is like a series of stones that are set just above the water. So you know, maybe there's like a large pond and there's stones that you can hop from one end of the pond to the other end of the pond just by kind of like hopping from stone to stone to stone to stone. This is the way in which Gypsy Rose views life. It is a series of stones that are set just above the water in which she hops from one stone to another stone, and it's all done just for her to get ahead. And for her, not only to just get ahead, but to stay ahead, because she is running away and staying away from all of her feelings. But these are feelings that she does not understand, nor does she want to. And it all started with her mom, Claudine Blanchard. Because Claudine could be sweet, but she also could be incredibly salty. So there was sweet but salty Claudine Blanchard, and Claudine was as lost to herself as Gypsy Rose is. Because Claudine was overlooked for most of her own life. That is, until she became a mother. And suddenly, people were listening to her. Intelligent people, doctors, were suddenly listening to her when she would express concern over her newborn baby daughter's welfare. And what happened? She just got attention. So while it may have started out perfectly harmless, because it was a mother expressing her genuine concern over her child's welfare, it subsequently unlocked years of Claudine herself being ignored and overlooked, and all of the suppression of the emotions that had come with it. Because for Claudine, even if she would never admit it, it hurt. It really, in fact, hurt her. But because it hurt so much, that was something that Claudine would rather shut down than admit to. But now, as a new mother, Claudine didn't have to admit to anything about the lack of attention that she had received, because now she realized she could get so much attention by simply expressing concern for her child and the almost near instant release of pleasure that she would experience. And then it just snowballed, because suddenly people cared. People that were really smarter than her as well. And people didn't just care, but they listened. They suddenly paid attention to Claudine. And she was no longer invisible, but very, very visible. And she didn't have to do any of the necessary work or growth or self-improvement. It was just given to her. So Gypsy Rose became a tool of her mother's. So if Claudine, for example, was feeling bad about herself, she would call a doctor and she would complain that there is something wrong with Gypsy. If Claudine was feeling sad, or if she was feeling insecure, or she was feeling lonely, or moody, or hormonal, or any of the normal human experiences and emotions that one might in fact have, instead of acknowledging how she was feeling, but she wouldn't do that because she didn't understand feelings. Instead of doing that, Claudine, and especially because of the fact that Claudine had spent so many years of her life being emotionally shut down because it hurt so much that she had been ignored and neglected, but rather than feel that and experience it, she had shut all of that down, as well as her own emotions. So because Claudine had shut down all the ranges of normal human emotions and did not then develop any healthy coping mechanisms in place, Claudine now had a very unhealthy coping mechanism. Because whatever she was feeling, all the feelings that she didn't want to feel, because if she felt that, then maybe she was going to start to feel how badly the neglect she had experienced had felt. So rather than feel her feelings, she used Gypsy Rose as a convenient tool to get attention, to make up for all the years that she had been overlooked. So she now had a very unhealthy coping mechanism. So however Claudine was feeling, she could get a quick fix of this newfound attention on tap to soothe her unruly emotions by saying there was something wrong with Gypsy Rose. So essentially, Gypsy Rose had become not only her tool, but she had also become Claudine's crutch. But also, in addition to that, she had become her lifeline to the world she had previously been excluded from. Overlooked and ignored, and now attention galore. Not just attention, but people really listened to her. People that were so much smarter than her and so much more qualified than her. So, Gypsy Rose was a tool. Gypsy Rose was a crutch, because as what tends to happen as we get older and more parts of ourselves become unlocked, that we start to know ourselves better. This might have been a time in Claudine's life in which she could have come to have known herself better as well. But because she was using Gypsy Rose as a tool, and then therefore as a crutch, anything that might have become illuminated to her was then shunned as well. So essentially, in essence, Claudine shunned further development in parts of herself the way she herself had been shunned when she was younger. So because she had previously been shunned from the world and overlooked and ignored, she and those fundamental parts of herself that she had excommunicated then became as foreign to her as a long-lost island would be foreign to land. Because she was using Gypsy Rose as a crutch to her own emotional development, this then further completely suppressed any emotions that Claudine would be able to experience. Because first and foremost, she didn't want to experience emotions. They made her feel uncomfortable because the presence of those emotions in her body reminded her of how she felt emotionally by maybe not getting attention when she was younger or when she was a teenager or at any period in her life. So she was very uncomfortable with the experience of normal emotions anyway. This was then further exacerbated by the fact that in the absence of healthy coping mechanisms for feelings, she would then use Gypsy Rose as a tool to get her own emotional needs met when she was having some sort of an emotional reaction in her body. And it could have even been she was just feeling hormonal. But she didn't like the way any of them felt in her body. So even if she was feeling hormonal, guess the fuck what? To the doctor they went, or to the doctor she called. So this then again would continue to further suppress any normal emotional development in Claudine. Thus, this was the suppression of empathic traits or empathic qualities inside of Claudine. It was the complete erosion of emotional empathy. Because now, Claudine would never be ignored or overlooked ever again. And because again, she had the complete erosion of her emotional empathy towards her daughter, and she was actively now exploiting her. Her daughter was no longer a daughter to her, but a salve to soothe her soul and whatever emotions she experienced. And this was fine at first. When Gypsy Rose was young and she couldn't talk back, So Claudine would just call the doctor or just take Gypsy Rose to the doctor. And she would get a quick fix of attention. It was even maybe okay when Gypsy Rose was a toddler, but it really, in fact, became a challenge when Gypsy Rose could talk and could challenge Claudine. And this also happened to have coincided at the time when Gypsy Rose was testing the boundaries, as all children naturally do. You might have imagined that this would cause a great number of unpleasant emotions that Claudine would experience. You would be right. This, of course, caused a massive, monumental, enormous spike of unpleasant emotions experienced by Claudine. Because remember, she looked at Gypsy Rose like Gypsy Rose was a tool. And now suddenly her tool wasn't working. So maybe you buy a power drill on Amazon so you can hang up some shelves. And it works fine at first. It's dependable, it's reliable. But then one day the tool stops working. But it worked all these days up until now. Why did it suddenly stop working? My tool's not working. Maybe you get mad at it. Maybe you throw it down on the desk or on the table. Maybe you yell at it. Maybe you throw it in the garbage. That's for a non-sentient tool that you just use for some household things. But that tool isn't tied to your very sense of emotional health in the world, because to Claudine, Gypsy Rose was. So now she looked at her tool that was fundamental for her own perceived survival, and she looked at her tool like it wasn't working. Because again, I remind you, Gypsy Rose was no longer a person to her. She was a tool. She had zero emotional empathy for Gypsy Rose. She was actively exploiting her for her own gain and her own benefit. And Gypsy Rose was as fundamental to her sense of self as oxygen itself was. And now her tool wasn't even working. And to add insult to injury, it wasn't working and it could talk back. And it could potentially tell the doctor she was fine. Oh no. So this is when the salty side of Claudine came to the fore. And Claudine wasn't just a little bit salty, like table salt, hodo. She was as salty as a salt mine with no way out of it. Because that's how it felt to Gypsy Rose. Because when Claudine's uber salty side came out, Claudine would ignore her, would not even acknowledge her, would withhold love, physical affection, and even basic attention from Gypsy. Would ignore her. So Gypsy might try to talk to her mother, and her mother would act as if she wasn't even there. That's without the withholding of the physical affection, the emotional affection that she wasn't receiving either. So Claudine was essentially denying Gypsy Rose's very existence, unless Gypsy Rose went along with what she wanted and what she would say. Now, as maybe you can imagine, this was quite confusing to Gypsy Rose, as her mother blew hot and cold to her. But she only blew hot when Gypsy Rose did what her mother wanted her to do. And her mother would blow cold anytime she would express a real personal need, or to be seen or recognized for herself or as a sentient human being. So, as a survival coping mechanism, Gypsy Rose learned to shut down any part of herself that was not aligned with what her mother wanted of her. Because it was like she would fail to exist when she was herself, and she would only again exist again when she was doing her mother's will. Because again, Claudine blew hot and cold. If Gypsy Rose had a need that Claudine had no need herself for, or if Gypsy Rose had expressed an opinion that her mother didn't care for, maybe, oh, I don't know, such as an opinion of, really, Mom, I'm okay, I can walk, her mother would ignore her, would not even talk to her, would act as if she didn't exist. So in order to survive the perilous war ground that her home had become, she learned to shut down fundamental parts of herself. This is Gypsy Rose. So on a deeply fundamental level, Gypsy Rose became as shut down as Claudine, in fact, was. And this is how generational trauma exists. It's not to say that Claudine's own mother, so this would be Gypsy Rose's grandmother, it's not to say that Gypsy Rose's grandmother did exactly to Claudine what Claudine did to Gypsy Rose. No, because every different soul here has a different journey and a different set of soul contracts and agreements that we are here to experience and to learn from. So every soul has a different journey, but it is to say that the end result of said journey that Claudine had experienced was in fact the same. Claudine was shut down because she was plain and was shown to me as not being very bright. She was not a great beauty, nor was she a great conversationalist. She didn't have a great mind. She just was. And because she just was, and she did not work on herself to any degree, she did not read to educate herself. She did not try to educate herself in any great capacity. She did not work out or work on her appearance to any degree. So the just was that Claudine, in fact, was perpetuated. And therefore, she was easy to overlook. And just like she, Claudine, didn't work on herself in any meaningful way, she also did not work on managing the unpleasant emotions that she herself would ever experience. She just shut them down. And then, what did Gypsy Rose learn to do? Just shut them down. So yes, Claudine had shut down all of the unpleasant emotions that she had experienced. That was until Gypsy Rose was born. And Gypsy Rose then became the key to unlocking the years of neglect that Claudine had felt she experienced. And Gypsy Rose also became the cure to all of those years of neglect. And once Claudine had experienced it, not the years of the neglect, but that Gypsy Rose was the cure to the neglect. Once she had experienced it, She was not giving it up for anything. Not for the mental or actual physical health of her child, not for the emotional harm that she was causing her child, not for her child's own sense of self or self-identity or safety or sense of agency, not for anything. And because Claudine already did not see Gypsy as a person, but as a tool, and she had already shut down all of her emotions and her emotional empathy, well, this was remarkably easy for her to continue to do. So all Gypsy Rose could in fact do to survive the storm her mother had become was to withdraw, retract, retreat, and just be. So if Claudine just was, Gypsy learned from Claudine to just be. And Gypsy Rose had shut down her own emotions to survive and became a blank canvas that her mother could shape and mold and project her own needs onto. And in return, Gypsy Rose got love. Not real love, of course, but this was conditional love, because Gypsy Rose only experienced love from her mother when she did what her mother wanted her to do. Was never loved outside of that. Was never even seen as a person outside of that. But to a surviving child that was just making it day to day, it was enough. So when Gypsy Rose would listen to what Claudine wanted of her, she got the sweet side of Claudine, and Claudine got the attention she so desperately needed. And as a bonus, she also got a compliant child. So it was winning all around. Except it wasn't really winning, but a highly dysfunctional merry-go-round. And because Gypsy Rose was so shut down, she did not see any way out of it. At least not on her own end. But again, because Gypsy Rose, in fact, was so shut down and was a blank canvas in which people could project their own needs onto, Gypsy Rose had also learned how to be highly attuned to body language, facial tics, and emotions. Because these were all essential survival skills for growing up with Claudine and her capricious emotions. So Gypsy Rose also learned how to be what others needed her to be, not just her mother. But she would learn what version of herself was needed to get her own attention and to get her own actual needs met by other people in the world, because she wasn't getting them met at home. And it was exactly these skills that Gypsy Rose had used when confiding in Nicholas Go-John, who would go on to unalive Claudine for Gypsy Rose. Because what was shown to me is that Gypsy Rose had played sad and vulnerable, and very much, in fact, this is wild, the way it came in. The way in which Nicole Kidman character was in the film To Die For, in which the Nicole Kidman character was I don't know if she was a weather reporter or a news reporter, like a small town news reporter. And her husband had wanted to start a family, and that just would not do. Because starting a family was a threat to the Nicole Kidman character's career. So she had gone on to befriend some teenagers that were like pothead teenagers. So she had gone on to become sexually involved with one of the teenagers and had woven a tale of abuse at the hands of her husband, who she wanted to have the teenager unalive. So in a way, the Nicole Kidman character had lowered herself so fundamentally to have her husband be unalived by becoming sexually involved with a teenager to mess with his head to get him to do this for her. This was shown to me very much the way in which Gypsy Rose had done this as well. Except Gypsy Rose was not like some career woman who had a burgeoning career of her own, or thought she had a burgeoning career, but she very much lowered herself to become involved with a wounded other person that she could then manipulate to do this for her by weaving her own tale. So she too became sexually involved with, here's the thing, a friend. Because what was shown to me is that Gypsy Rose genuinely did not have any interest in him, but he was more of a friend to her in which she could be this vulnerable pretend version of herself. And she had played the damsel in distress to get him to unalive her mom so she could then be free. So Gypsy Rose had learned to use people to have her own needs met from her mom, who had used her to have her own needs met. Is this not crazy? Generational trauma playing out right here. Gypsy Rose had learned to use people to have her needs met from her own mother that had used her to get her own needs met. And she had then used that against her mom to set herself free. But was Gypsy in fact abused? Yes, absolutely she was. But the abuse was not the actual motive for her getting Nicholas Godejohn to unalive her mother. The motive was shown to me as being just to get away, simply to get the fuck away. But after years of Gypsy Rose being shut down and denied in existence based in actual truth and in her own actual needs, she had been trained to be nothing, to do nothing, and to get others to do for you. And that's exactly what Gypsy did. She got someone else to do the dirty work for her. And all it cost her was a few years of her life in prison. And it was a few years of a life in which she had spent alive, but not really even living. So in that case, what was a few more at that point? She actually didn't have it all that bad in prison. Here's why. All of her essential needs were met. First and foremost, she was housed, she was fed, she was again being taken care of by somebody else that was not Claudine. And this was on no effort of her own part. She needed to do nothing to get all of her needs met. And who was now taking care of her, if not Claudine? The state penitentiary. So Gypsy Rose did not, in fact, have it all that bad. She got to get away from Claudine. She got to have all of her essential needs met, and it just cost her a couple of years of her life. From her perspective, a life that she had spent alive but not living. So what's a few more on top of it? And while Gypsy Rose was incarcerated, she did not yet have a plan for after. She knew she would be okay. And she was. Because what was shown to me was a young, idealistic, and empathic man named Ryan Scott Anderson had written letters to Gypsy and was thrilled when she had responded. Not that she had anything better to do, but shh, don't tell him that. And even though Gypsy Rose could not see his face nor read his body language, she could in fact read him through the letters and what he had shared with her. And he was kind and empathic, so she knew to play the wounded bunny in need of healing and saving. And it was for her easy, in fact, to be what Ryan wanted her to be, as she had never been anything to herself anyway, but had always been something for somebody else. So she allowed herself to be what he needed her to be, so she could then get what she needed from him. So again, she was using somebody to get her own needs met, and she was using him by being what he needed her to be. He needed her to be, because of his empathic qualities, he needed her to be the deeply wounded and damaged soul that he could try to fix. And slowly, Ryan fell in love with the construct of who Gypsy Rose was, and was delighted to discover that she too, quote unquote, loved him. He wanted to rescue her. He wanted to be a safe person and a safe place for her. And he wanted to marry her. And that was fine with her. Because then, when she was released, instead of going to a halfway house, she could go live with her husband. So, they got married when she was still incarcerated, and then upon her release, she got to go home to her new house, no halfway house, with a man who wanted to take care of her and love her, because she was the wounded bunny in need of saving. Winning! But what happens to the bird with the broken wing when it has been healed? It flies away. So Gypsy used Ryan for the healing because he energetically filled her up and he soothed her broken soul, which was not in fact broken, only barren. And he healed her so-called broken wings, just like the doctors did. And once she felt whole because she had siphoned all the energy that she needed from him, and thus needed him no longer, the marriage fell apart, as marriages of convenience tend to do when they are no longer convenient. Now, not only was Gypsy Rose's marriage to Ryan no longer convenient for her, what was the very first thing that Gypsy Rose had chosen to share with me when I connected to her energy? That first and foremost, she is loving all the new attention that she is getting, and that she feels like the phoenix who has risen from the ashes of her burned to the ground previous life. So this is a woman that when she leaves her home, so to say, she's not just walking out the door and quietly closing the door behind her. No. This is a woman that when she leaves, she slams the door behind her. She slams it so hard, in fact, that the wall will shake. And one could say on an energetic level, by leaving that way, she is slamming the door so hard that she is bringing down the entire house with her. She does not go quietly into the night. She, from her perspective, rises from the ashes of her previous life. even if she is the one that is doing the burning down to the ground. Because she didn't just run away from Claudine. She had Claudine unalived. Because she didn't just leave and close the door quietly behind her. She slammed the door and burned the house to the ground. So again, it's not just that this marriage had no longer been convenient for her. This is very much Gypsy Rose's MO. She burns the house down to the ground. So is it then any wonder that just 2 short years later, not only has she filed for divorce, but she also filed for a restraining order to keep the drama going. Not only is it real life over here, but it's real life punctuated perfectly by what I was saying here. And even though she burned that house down to the ground, here's the crazy thing. Ryan gave her a home. And he gave her the appearance of a life, of a nice, normal life, of a woman that was a wounded and damaged soul that was just starting to get her life together, but it was all for the sake of the interviews. So he gave her this nice home that she could move into, so she didn't have to move into a halfway house, but he also gave her, if you will, some sort of incredible facade management of a nice normal girl who is just getting her life together. So when they came to do an interview, she seemed like she was on the right road. But none of it was real. Not for Gypsy Rose, at least. But don't cry for her, because she certainly hasn't shed a single tear. Because she does not have anything inside of her to guide her towards feelings. Not for Ryan, whether it's this husband with the name Ryan, or whatever future partners she's going to manage to snag, whatever their names may be. Not for Nicholas Go-John, who is spending the rest of his days incarcerated and behind bars. Not for herself, she hasn't shed any tears, and certainly none for Claudine either. But her mom trained her and trained her well. So Gypsy Rose knows she can burn that house with Ryan down to the ground because there will always be someone else to take care of her. And if it's not Ryan, it will be someone else, but not Gypsy. Never Gypsy will take care of herself. So that is the reading that I have for you on Gypsy Rose Blanchard. I hope that you have found this video to be insightful, maybe even thought-provoking, and I remind you to please take what resonates and to leave the rest behind. And this is also your further reminder to stay in the high vibration.